Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. Today, I'm going to be doing my first comparison between two big bore GT motorcycles. I'll be looking at Kawasaki's 1979 KZ1000 Shaft and Suzuki's 1982 GS1100G. And on paper, these bikes are super similar. They both have big, air-cooled 4-cylinder engines. They both have 5-speed transmissions and shaft final drive. They have the twin shocks in the rear, big beefy fork tubes in the front. They both have dual disc front brakes with single piston calipers. And performance-wise, horsepower-wise, they're very, very similar on paper. But today we're going to look at what they're actually like to live with and what they're like to ride. Alright, first things first, the Kawasaki is by far the looker of these two bikes. It has beautiful two-tone paint, excellent chrome work, nice details on the engine. I love the mix of polished metal and blacked out engine block. It's got the blacked out fork tubes. It's got the chrome front fender, single clean headlight, very, very clean styling, the completely flat seat, or mostly flat. And just, it's a beautiful bike. There's really not a bad angle to look at that bike from. In comparison, the Suzuki's not as cleanly styled, although I like it. It's a nice looking bike, but it doesn't quite hold a candle to the KZ. To make this comparison relatively fair, these bikes have honestly been modified similarly. They both are running progressive shocks in the front. They're also running Speigler steel braided brake lines that really improve the braking performance of the single piston front calipers. And finally, I'm actually running the same Emgo Magna wide handlebar on both of these motorcycles, and it gives them, on a big heavy bike, it gives you a nice leverage. They're a little bit wider than like a super bike bar or a drag bend handlebar, and it allows you to change direction more easily and improves control of the bike. Seating position wise, when you ride these two bikes, you sit more on top of the Kawasaki. It's very comfortable if you've got longer legs, and really both of these are comfortable all day. They just, the difference being the Suzuki, you feel more like you're sitting in it instead of on top of it, and some of that contributes to the Suzuki has a little bit, I think, better control feel. It's a little bit easier to transition, and I think part of that is just because my weight, it doesn't feel like it's quite sitting as high in the frame. Both of these bikes are running the same tires. I've got the Shinko 230s, front and back. They're similar sizes on these. They may be a little bit different width-wise or height-wise between the bikes, but they're both running the same rubber, and I like that particular tire. It also makes it easier to evaluate both of these machines head-to-head accurately. There are a couple of major differences between these two bikes. The first being that the Kawasaki is of the older generation with flat slide carburetors. And that means that every time you twist the throttle, it requires your wrist to lift all 4 slides in the carburetors, and so it's a little bit, there's just a slightly more effort to turn the throttle on the Kawasaki. The Suzuki, it's got a very light throttle, and it's got the constant velocity carbs, and I know it's simply because in 82 Kawasaki also had constant velocity carbs, but I don't have an 82 Kawasaki in my garage, so just subtle difference between the two bikes. Another difference is instrumentation. Both bikes have a fuel gauge, and that's super handy. I really appreciate that. The Kawasaki, for whatever reason, the tanks look to be about the same size from the outside. They're both large, squared off tanks, but the Kawasaki is the tank on the Kawasaki is significantly smaller. The last time I checked my gas mileage on the Kawasaki, I hit reserve at 127 miles. Versus the last time I ran the Suzuki to reserve, I got 176 miles before reserve on the Suzuki. So the Suzuki has appreciably longer range, and both bikes are long distance comfortable, so that does become a factor if you're on a long trip, because you may or may not be ready to stop, or it may be a long distance between fill-ups, and the extra range of the Suzuki is greatly appreciated. Gas mileage as well is better on the Suzuki. I consistently get in the mid 40s on the Suzuki, and I would say probably in the mid 30s on the Kawasaki. I did look at the carburetors on both bikes, and they're both set up like they should be. They both run great, so I'm not exactly sure why the Kawasaki doesn't get the same fuel mileage or similar fuel mileage to the Suzuki, but it simply doesn't. Transmission wise, both of these bikes have 5-speed transmissions. They both shift nicely. The Kawasaki transmission has a little bit longer shift throw. They both really, even by today's standards, both of these bikes shift well. I would have to give the nod to the Suzuki. To date, of all the bikes I've ridden, including modern bikes, it has one of the best shifting transmissions on any bike that I've experienced. Because I'm running stock exhaust on the Kawasaki, it has more of a quiet jet engine sound to the exhaust. It does not have the hot rod sound that the Suzuki has.
I'm currently on the 1979 Kawasaki KZ1000 Shaft, and just driving around some of these beautiful Pennsylvania back roads, and just trying to give you a sense of what it's like to ride the bike. So I'll shut up a little bit and let you get a feel for it. It's a little bit sneaky in the way that it picks up speed. It's relatively stable at speed. It doesn't really wander or wobble anywhere. Just a very nice open GT bike. If you're on roads like this where it's not super shifting intensive and you're just tooling through the countryside, it's really a nice place to be. This bike could definitely be hustled through the corners, and it quits itself surprisingly well, and it's really, with the suspension modifications that I've made and the braking modifications, it really is up to, it honestly handles better than a lot of modern motorcycles. I like the fact that this bike has the speedometer that goes up past 85, but really on a bike of yeah, for what I use this bike for, it's honestly pointless. I don't know that I ever really go much over 85, 90 miles an hour, so on a track, of course. Bike pulls very cleanly from 2,000 RPM up. Shift quality is nice. Ride quality with the way I have it set up now is firm, but it's certainly not punishing. It has longer travel suspension, which is nice, and really performs admirably well, especially under braking, where the stock springs that were in it would just have it diving like a submarine every time I got on the brakes. But if anything happens, it's unexpected. I can easily just no drama stop. My right mirror right now, I don't know if you can hear it, but every time I get up about 4,500 RPM, my right mirror starts to vibrate, and actually I can, even over the wind noise and the earplugs I have in, I can hear that. Actually, it's a little bit louder than the engine noise, which is quite comical.
I don't know which one sounded better stock, and without running a similar pipe on the Kawasaki, I'm not sure how it would sound. I'm sure it would sound fantastic. All big Kawasaki 4-cylinders sound great with a 4-into-1 pipe. I may do that at some point, but the chrome and the exhaust condition-wise on the Kawasaki is just, it's in fantastic original shape, and it would be a shame to take it off. I really like keeping that bike as close to stock looking as I can. By comparison, the Suzuki's original exhaust was not in as nice a condition, so I replaced it with the Delkevic 4-into-1. Love riding it. It's a little bit hard to stay out of the throttle because it sounds so good under load when you're giving it gas, and you'll hear it on the video here.
I'm currently on the 1982 Suzuki GS1100G. I'll be quiet, I'll let you listen to the bike, and we'll talk a little bit about it. every time I ride this bike, I fall in love with it all over again. What a fantastic machine. It is so smooth as the revs pick up. It's honestly smoother under load at higher RPM than it is just cruising. And man, I just love it. It's so easy in the corners. It's effortless. The shifting is beautiful. The brakes are so well matched. The throttle is it's so easy to be precise with the throttle and the clutch. The clutch pull is very, very light. And so what it all these little things just add up to a bike that, instead of concentrating on the bike and concentrating on being smooth, the bike itself is smooth. The bike is very easy to ride, and so I can spend a whole day just enjoying the ride. And honestly, when I'm in the corners, man, it just makes me want to go faster. But it's just a tremendous machine. Love it. And the sound, man, putting that Delkevic exhaust on this thing, it just sounds so good. Like the Kawasaki, this thing pulls from less than 2,000 RPM and just very, very smoothly. The ride on this bike is also set up firmly. It's kind of like a German sports sedan. It's firm and well controlled without being punishing. I'm running progressive suspension springs in the front, and in coordination with the brakes, it's got the Speigler brake lines, and I just have confidence in braking. The brake power matches the speed that the bike generates very nicely. And honestly, this big 1100cc motor, I can go quickly and really be lazy with the shifting. You know, that was a corner exit at about 2,000 RPM, and it still just pulled with authority. Yeah, dream day for me is hustling this bike through some back road corners.
Power-wise, the Kawasaki has a very smooth, linear power band. It never has quite the torque of the Suzuki, nor the outright power, I would say. I'm not really interested in strapping either bike on a dyno. I really don't care. They both run very, very well. On paper, their horsepower ratings and torque ratings are within a couple horsepower and within 5 foot-pounds of torque of each other. But the Suzuki just, it does definitely have the edge as far as power goes. As you rev the Kawasaki up, you do get some vibration through the handlebars, and it'll cause some buzziness in the mirrors. And I probably would not notice it as much if it had an exhaust on it. But because it's quiet, maybe the vibration is a little bit more noticeable. The Suzuki has its own little vibration things here and there. Sometimes I'll get some vibration from the fairing. just a little bit of a buzz at certain RPMs, but they're both relatively smooth. They'll both do 70 miles an hour all day long, and no complaints. Another aspect to the transmission is the drive line, and on the Suzuki there is very minimal drive line lash, even though it's a shaft drive bike. Meaning when I get on and off the throttle, there's no slack that needs to be taken up. It doesn't wait for a second and then kick in. The power is very smooth on and off throttle. In comparison, the Kawasaki is not quite as refined. You do have a little bit more drive line lash to it. It's a little bit harder to be smooth on it. Where the Suzuki completely outshines the Kawasaki is on tighter back roads that have a lot of transition and maybe some elevation change. The Suzuki is just much easier to ride aggressively. I recently took about a 150-mile ride on the Kawasaki and enjoyed it. It was a wonderful ride. I explored some new back roads. There were a lot of tight, twisty roads with elevation change thrown in, and the Kawasaki did well. It handled itself admirably well and was able to keep a pretty good pace. However, I repeated that same ride, about 150 miles of just Pennsylvania's finest back roads. I repeated that ride on the Suzuki, and the Suzuki, I was just able to go more quickly with much more confidence. I never had to fight the heft of the bike. I'm not sure exactly if it's in the steering head angle or the rake numbers or exactly how Suzuki gets the difference in nimbleness, but is a much more nimble machine and a much more confidence-inspiring machine, and just easier. When I transition from side to side on the Kawasaki, I feel like I'm riding a tall bike, and it just takes a lot of effort and body English to get it to transition quickly from side to side. If you're doing a longer trip and more open roads, there's not as much of a difference between these two bikes. They're roughly equivalent, but in the corners, the Suzuki just really shines. I wanted to touch on one more thing regarding the instrumentation on the bikes. The Suzuki has two features that the Kawasaki does not have. Suzuki has a side stand indicator light to let you know if you let the side stand down, and it also has a 5-speed gear indicator light, and it'll illuminate gears 1 through 5. And so I never am running down the highway and wondering if I'm in top gear and having to triple check and try to shift up again. I know right away what gear I'm in. And you know, I know that sounds like something that an experienced rider wouldn't need, and it's not a necessity, but it's just handy. There's just times where I'm riding down the road and wonder, oh wait, am I in 5th or 4th? And it's easy to, I love the gear indicator, and I'm glad to see that feature coming back on some of the modern stuff. So to wrap this up, these are both amazing bikes. You know, is this comparison, you know, 100% accurate with, you know, do these bikes compete with each other anymore on the sales floor? Do they ever even compete with each other on the street? And the answer is maybe rarely, but it's not a common occurrence. But they are competing for my affection in the garage. So I have to give my nod to the Suzuki. It's not as pretty, but it's just function-wise, it's a better overall package. I still love the Kawasaki. I still love riding it. It does not have the broad range usability that the Suzuki has, and that's why I'm picking the Suzuki as my favorite. But let me know what you think. If looks are more important to you, or if you're a Kawasaki fan, I get it. I own several Kawasaki's. My first bike was a Kawasaki, I've owned, goodness, lots and lots of them, and I love them. I think the original Z1 is one of the prettiest bikes out there. So I'm not just a Suzuki fan, but just giving you my subjective take on these two machines. Hope you enjoy.